We are now going ahead with our next event, which is being presented by Mr. Bhupender Singh. This event is on impact of RCEP and other FTAs on India-Japan trade relationship. I would request Mr. Bhupender Singh to take over from here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome from our side, Artham Law Chambers, for this half-an-hour session on impact of the free trade agreements between India and Japan trade relationships. From our side, we really thank Indo-Japan Business Council to give us this opportunity to highlight certain key areas where the Indian and Japanese business houses can be very mindful about in terms of the new free trade agreements which are being signed literally left, right, and center by various countries. Without much of ado, I would like to start our discussions, and I'll share my screen. It's a brief presentation where we have kind of focused on few critical aspects of the free trade agreements which India has been signing or are under discussions, along with the recently announced and soon to be implemented Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, RCEP.
Yes, yes, it's visible.
All right, thank you so much. Right. So coming to this presentation topic, what we thought along with IGBC team, that in the recent few times, primarily in last 2 to 3 years, what we have seen globally is that the international trade relationships are not just impacted by mere geopolitical reasons, but there have been many more changes at various countries levels, where the countries have lately started increasing their tariff and non-tariff barriers on trade. Now, when we talk about tariff barriers, these are primarily a simpliciter increase in the rate of customs duty. While we talk about the non-tariff barriers of trade, these are primarily some additional compliance requirements. For example, some certification on agricultural products, maybe some certification of IT products or other textile leather products. So while these certification requirements are mandatory in the country of import, but at the end of the day, they do not lead into any additional customs duties payment. So they become non-tariff barriers of trade. Now, tariff barriers as well as non-tariff barriers are regulated by World Trade Organization, WTO, under the aegis of GATT, General Agreement on Trade in Tariffs in Goods. Now, one of the kind of leeway which WTO provides is a signature or an agreement between two or more countries, which we call as a free trade agreement, or in case of a multilateral countries, which we call as a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, RCEP. What it effectively means is that the trade between such countries will be free flow, and the countries will not be allowed to impose any tariff and non-tariff barriers of trade which are beyond that particular agreement. In light of these tariff and non-tariff barriers, we thought that recently concluded RCEP, which is a big kind of agreement which caters to 30% of the global trade, may have some impact on the trade between India and Japan. And this could be the right time to discuss the impact of RCEP on the relationship, the trade relationships primarily between India and Japan. So what it effectively means when we talk about the regional trade agreements or the free trade agreements. As of today, as of October 2021, as per the reportings gone to WTO, World Trade Organization, in total, there are approximately 351 regional trade tariff agreements. It means that the countries could be say 100, but these 100 countries could have entered into multiple tariff agreements, allowing free flow of goods and services at a lower rate, lower customs duties, or at a nil customs duty rates. While there are 350 or 351 odd contracts or agreements which are already in force, there are approximately 15 agreements which are still under discussions. So this is at a global level, which means globally in total 351 and 15 agreements under discussion. But when we drill down to India and Japan, what we see is that as of today, Japan has got approximately 18 free trade or regional trade agreements already in force. And when we look at the historical data, we would see that the biggest jump into change in RTAs or the regional trade agreement between from Japanese side was during the period 2007 to 2011, where until 2007, Japan had entered only into 3 regional trade agreements or free trade agreements, but by end of 2011, that 3 moved up to 12. Similarly, when we look on the other side, which is India, the regional trade agreements from India's side saw the biggest huge jump during the period 2005 to 11, where we actually moved from 8 regional trade agreements or free trade agreements to 16 regional trade stroke free trade agreements. So the jump you would see between the signature or signing of trade agreements was more or less 2005 to 2011. And if we have to kind of look back during that period, that was also the period when globally there was an economic meltdown, 2007 and 2008, and countries were imposing tariff barriers of trade by increasing customs duty. So most of the countries, not just India and Japan, most of the countries thought it better that let there be a regular customs tariff for all the imports, but let us have a separate free trade agreement with the countries with whom we want to trade more. And under those free trade agreements, the customs duty rate can be brought down, which have actually been brought down significantly. So 2007 to 2011 is the period where the free trade agreement saw the biggest increase, the sharpest rise. And since 2011-12, the bilateral free trade agreements lost their steam until I would say 2018 and 19. But in last 2 years, maybe driven by pandemic, the discussions on free trade agreements have already picked up steam again. Now, in this background, what we have to see is the overall in terms of who are the real users or who are the big kind of, countries who have actually got benefited from these free trade agreements. Remember the baseline principle, free trade agreement effectively provides you somewhere a customs duty exemption or lower customs duty when you are trading between the designated countries. So a heat map, which we have taken from the WTO website itself, it shows that the highest or the biggest user of free trade agreement is the European Union. In total, 154 regional trade agreements have been entered by European Union. And followed by East Asia, where we have got approximately 101 free trade agreements. And as you can see from the heat map, the majority of the trade in goods effectively covers between Europe and East Asia. And these are the two areas where the regional trade agreements have actually got benefited the business users who are primarily dealing into the import and export of goods. Now, in light of this free trade agreement, what has been India's stance? Because as I mentioned, since 2005, India also have seen a lot of free trade agreements, but lately, in last couple of years, the stance on free trade agreement has seen two kind of different waves. First and foremost, in I would say last 5 to 6 years time, the government of India has been focusing more on a self-reliant India, which effectively is nothing but Atmanirbhar Bharat, where the objective and intention of the government is to have minimum dependency on import of goods, but to make India as an export hub. Now, it's one thing that government announces policy, but it's absolutely another thing where the policies have to be implemented. And to implement this Atmanirbhar Bharat as a scheme or a trade facilitation agenda, government has been doing quite a lot in last 2.5 to 3 years, where we have seen various production-linked incentive schemes being announced, which effectively is permitting various manufacturers globally to set up their manufacturing plants or some sort of a trading hub in India, and also properly pushed and supported by ease of doing business. What we mean by ease of doing business is nothing much, nothing more. I'm not referring to any of the World Bank or IMF reports. It's as simple as how quickly and faster certain documentation can take place online, which is digital documentation. And as you would read the reports and the data speaks for itself, Government of India has done quite a lot in last few years to digitize most of its application filings and the approval processes. Yes, there are few areas where some improvisation still might be required, but more or less we are on the right track to kind of implement ease of doing business for India. At the same time, government is cognizant of the fact that any country, not just India, no country can totally depend on its own manufacturing setup. And definitely there will be some sort of dependency on the trade with different countries. And to that extent, what Government of India has been doing is that bilateral free trade agreement discussions have been kept ongoing. And the most recent ones which are under discussion and properly reported also are India's free trade agreement discussion with UK, which is almost at the verge of signing, followed by Australia, And as recent as day before yesterday, a working group has been set up for a free trade agreement with United Arab Emirates. Now, the whole objective, again, I'm linking it back with the previous statement. The countries are deciding whether they want to be part of a larger and bigger trade bloc with multiple countries coming into picture, or do they want to have a smaller bilateral trade bloc, where as a country, I decide which are the countries, other countries with whom I can trade more in specific products. The reason or comparative between these two scenarios is that in a regional or a larger trade bloc, there is a possibility that as a participating country, I may have lesser control over the outcome because I will have to negotiate on the terms and conditions with multiple countries for almost all the products. But when I talk about a bilateral, which is two country discussions or negotiation, as a country, I know exactly what my positive factors or points are from the trade in goods perspective. And I also know the other side's positive points. So I can get a better tariff schedule covering the limited products which are actually being traded, and it doesn't become an open-ended support where all the products can be imported at a lower rate. So it seems India is walking on that path where bilateral free trade agreements are talk of the town, and that's what the government of India might continue in near future as well. Now, government has taken a very strong stance on the two specific points, very again conscious of the fact that digital services, e-commerce, and data localization are the big things. Now, all of us know that data and information is the actual go-to thing in today's world. Anyone who has data or information, he knows what can be done or what cannot be done with that data and information. Till I would say 2017 or 2018 mid, most of the data was never stored in India. And again, most of the services, digital services I'm talking about, were being provided from other jurisdictions. What it led to a situation was that government of India had minimum control from a legal and regulatory perspective that where that data is being used by the service providers who are not based out of India. And hence government took a stance that as far as digital services and e-commerce are concerned and data localization is concerned, there should be some sort of presence in India. Now, these two factors have to be properly plugged in into a free trade agreement, which can happen better in a better situation or in a better form in a bilateral trade agreement. Last but not the least, government is absolutely clear about the balance of payments pressure, which keeps on going up and down. It's fluctuating, but broadly and majorly, the BOP balance of payment impact, which is coming from imports from China. And why China is a relevant example here, because the topic is RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, where China is one of the participating countries, which has allowed duty-free or a concessional rate of duty for trade in goods between these participating countries. Now, moving on, while the government has announced many policies on the free trade agreement, and also they are maybe going in the right direction to implement their global trade arrangement, at the same time, Minister of Finance was quoted a year or year and a half back that imports from free trade agreements are more often than not are misused, which effectively means that some incorrect declarations are being provided, because of which the imported goods in India get incorrect duty benefit, which otherwise may not have been available. In light of that, last year in 2020, government notified new customs rules, briefly called as Carotar rules, which puts onerous obligation on importer of goods in India, as well as exporter of goods, to provide some specific information. Now, the information could be, which is mandated to be provided, is what is the production process and what is the cost of manufacturing of goods which are being imported in India. The reason government wants to know is that if I am giving a free trade agreement benefit to, let's say, goods imported from Malaysia or maybe Thailand, did those goods actually get manufactured in Malaysia, Thailand, or were they just routed through it? The answer to that question will lie what kind of production process was implemented in Malaysia, Thailand, and what was the cost of manufacturing. So these two data points are mandatorily to be provided to the customs. A big question is the confidentiality. Or in our experience, in few situations or few cases, customs authorities in India have agreed to keep the data confidential, but it depends on case-to-case basis how strongly the importer as well as the exporter is able to explain the reason to keep the data confidential. then all this data and information has to be provided by consignment-wise details, consignment to consignment basis as per the rules. And the data, which even though once submitted to the authorities, customs authorities, it has to be stored and retained for a period of 5 years, which effectively means that after the date of import, add up another 5 years, the importer is under an obligation to keep that data with him. And the customs authorities can ask for that data during any period for those 5 years. And if the data is not provided or incorrectly provided, then the benefit which would have been granted at the time of import, that gets taken back and all the customs duties become payable with interest. Now, two last points on this requirements under Carota. The first one is that even though the importer exporter might have submitted all the data and information, customs authorities have been given a discretionary power to seek any additional information. Now, there is no kind of black and white list of question and answer or data or information which can be sought, and it's as open-ended as any information or any additional information. So the objective should be that when the goods are being imported into India, before import, all this necessary information and data and documents should be kept ready. And the customs authority should be given a complete set before, if possible, before the goods land at the port of import or immediately at the time of import of goods, so that there are minimum surprises. The second point is the last bullet on the slide is the faceless assessment. Now, customs has implemented faceless assessment. What it effectively means that if there's any query on the imported goods, now as an importer, you cannot directly reach out to the customs officers. That query will get assigned through the system at the back end to one of the officers who could be placed anywhere in India, and the importer will get that query over email. And the entire interaction and discussion will happen through email or through system. Now, the challenge, practical challenge, what we have observed in this kind of faceless assessment is that what question is being asked, what's the intention of that question, and what's the response which the importer provides. If there's any gap, then most likely than not, the faceless assessment could go negative, and it may not be favorable for the importer. So importers as well as exporters have to be really mindful about exactly what they are sharing as part of their import documentation. And it becomes relevant from Indo-Japan trade perspective because Indo-Japan also have a separate free trade agreement dated 2011, which we'll discuss now. Now, moving on to the recently concluded and announced Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, RCEP. Now, RCEP effectively got kind of signed on by all participating countries towards end of 2020, and it is coming into effect from 1st January 22. What effectively it means? Now, first and foremost, the participating countries. So participating countries under RCEP is ASEAN countries, which are Malaysia, Philippines, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, excluding India. And this is where I would like to draw everyone's attention here. Even though initially RCEP intended India to be part of ASEAN and hence part of RCEP, India in 2019 end withdrew from the discussions and negotiations for the reasons which we had discussed briefly at the beginning. At the same time, the RCEP countries have agreed to grant India as an observer status, which means India has a right to go back to the RCEP countries at a later point in time and request them to make India also part of RCEP. But as of today, India is not part of RCEP, and all the trade benefits for goods as well as services are not given to Indian exports to RCEP countries, vis-a-vis, on the other side, Indian imports from these RCEP countries. Other than ASEAN countries, we have got Japan, China, Australia, South Korea, New Zealand. So if you have to put it other ways, all ASEAN countries plus 5 countries constitute RCEP, and RCEP in total, as I was mentioning about, it constitutes around 30% of the total global trade in goods. So in the terms of real value of money of the traded goods, RCEP is one of the biggest trading bloc world over. Now, when we look at India's share in RCEP trade, one of the reasons why India decided to step back, at least at this stage, from RCEP, is that India's export to RCEP countries are pretty low as compared to Europe or maybe to the US. So exports from India accounts only 21% to RCEP countries. However, if you look at the import side, the imports constitute around 34% of total imports in India. This 34% more or less translates into one third of the total imports is a big troubling factor for the government of India. Because if India would have become part of RCEP, all these imports, 34% or one third of total imports, would have gone duty free, which effectively means there could have been a possibility where there might have been a significant surge in import of goods from these RCEP countries because everything could have or would have become duty free. So India didn't want to kind of, walk that path where one third of my imports go duty free. And when we look at this one third trade from RCEP countries, China plays a significant and a major role because out of the total trade deficit of approximately 100 billion US dollars, China's contribution is approximately 50%. And this 50% is despite the fact that India as a country have imposed anti-dumping duty as well as safeguard duty on quite a lot of products which are being imported from China. So just imagine a situation where no anti-dumping, no safeguard duty for goods imported from China, more so no customs duties also. So clearly India at this stage didn't want that situation to hamper its economic growth and hence decided to step back from RCEP. Now with this kind of data points for RCEP and the reasons for India to stay back, the next point is that this RCEP where Japan is also part or major contribution or major contributor to this RCEP arrangement, is it going to impact trade relationship between India or Japan, or it will remain neutral? The answer is that in our view, the trade relationship between India and Japan will not get impacted because of RCEP. Because as far as trade in goods between India and Japan is considered, there is always a separate free trade agreement, Japan-India Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. It's of year 2011 CEPA. And the relationship between India and Japan is not just in relation to CEPA. Japan has been providing continuous and constant economic assistance to India through loan and through subsidies. And one of the good example is the high-speed railways. So RCEP can continue to play its role in its own jurisdiction, while Indo-Japan trade can continue to function under CEPA of 2011. And we don't think that RCEP will have any kind of impact whatsoever as far as the trade in goods or services is considered between India and Japan. And when you look at the CEPA 2011, you will see, and when you compare it with the other free trade agreements, it's one of the most comprehensively drafted agreement, which literally covers almost everything except today's recent developments on the technology front. And hence, the trade relationship between India and Japan is not going to get impacted by RCEP. And whatever geopolitical things have to be looked at, many of you might have read about the focus on Indo-Pacific region, where India, Japan, and USA and Australia have created a separate 4-country group called as Quad, which is Quadrilateral Security Dialogue Team. And the main role and focus of this team is to stay focused on how to bring peace in the Indo-Pacific region. So we are not just looking from an economic perspective, but also from non-economic perspective, where India and Japan are literally hand in hand on various fronts. Having said so, it also becomes really important and relevant to see that what are the changes or what could be a comparative analysis when we have to talk about CEPA of 2011, which is Indo-Japan, vis-a-vis RCEP, which is recently concluded. Now, RCEP, if you see the content or the draft agreement, the first reaction or the first rather conclusion would be that RCEP is more favorable. The reason being that now there is a single set of rules of origin for all the countries involved. So there are approximately 15 or 16 countries involved in RCEP. All these countries have a standard rules of origin. So let's say Japan importing either from China or Malaysia, Japanese importer doesn't have to really look at different sets of rules, a single set of rules to figure out whether the goods will qualify for duty exemption or not. Similarly, rules of accumulation, which means that when we have to see whether goods have actually been manufactured in RCEP countries, goods manufactured in more than 2 or 3 RCEP countries get accumulated and can qualify as a product manufactured in RCEP. So again, a benefit under RCEP. Third beneficial point could be digital services and e-commerce, which are covered in RCEP, but currently not in CEPA. And this is one thing where India and Japan as two countries as part of CEPA can really look at or relook at their 2011 agreement to see if certain things have to be added up or not added up. Having said all these positive points for RCEP, the major impact in RCEP for Japanese exporter is the agricultural food exports. For whatever reasons, RCEP does not give any kind of duty concession to export of food products from Japan. And when we look at the total quantum from a data point perspective, Japan exports 39% of its total food production to RCEP countries plus India. Now, when we talk about export from Japan to RCEP countries, no duty benefit. But when we look at Indo-Japan agreement, the Indo-Japan agreement provides for that concessional rate of duties for import or export of food products from Japan to India. And in addition to these food exports, as I mentioned earlier, there are other factors also, including economic assistance between India and Japan, which weigh more than a mere RCEP. Because at the end of the day, RCEP just stops at the trade in goods, which can lead into balance of payment kind of a situation in the due course of time. And the second thing is that when we talk about Indo-Japan customs duties under the agreement, we know it's a standard lower rate, which is extremely, extremely low under the agreement. But when we look at the concessional tariff or the concessional duties under RCEP, every country has a different concessional duty. So it's not a standard exemption which is given to all RCEP countries. This being the case, if Japan has to export to China vis-a-vis India and Malaysia, Japan will have to look at all three countries separately to determine what is the actual duty benefit which Japan as an exporter will get. So at the end of the day, when the comparative has to happen, it's country to country basis. So all these rules of origin, rule of accumulation may become peripheral because the hard hitting fact is the tariff, the customs duty rate, which again, even under RCEP, vary from country to country. Well, all these things are very well said. And, as I mentioned, CEPA, which is 2011 agreement between India and Japan, it seems to be kind of, bringing the level playing field between India and Japan as trading partners. At the same time, it has to be kept in mind that there are certain things which all business houses in India as well as Japan should keep in mind. The first and foremost is, I would say, the gig economy or the digital services. That is something which is not part and parcel of the Indo-Japan agreement of 2011. So countries and the business houses will really have to push it hard to get some sort of digital services incorporated into the free trade agreement between India and Japan. At the same time, in the wake of RCEP being announced and implemented effective January 22, the business houses and the companies will have to see their supply chain, because if today some countries are in the ASEAN region are getting more benefited in customs duty rate on account of RCEP versus Indo-Japan treaty, then it has to be seen how that supply chain has to be managed. Then the reconstitution of economic and physical presence, if companies have their joint ventures, association of partnerships, or any kind of wholly owned subsidiary companies, it really has to be seen that where all those companies have to be set up so that eventually the ASEAN benefit under RCEP does not outweigh the Indo-Japan benefit, which is part and parcel of the 2011 treaty. Just a passing reference here, the first point, in 2020, India reduced the customs duty rates for imports from Japan significantly. It was almost 1/3 further reduction of what it was. And it seems that that reduction was an outcome of announcement of RCEP. So yes, government of India and Japan, of course, they are moving in the right direction to bring the customs duty rate at the bare minimum for trade in goods between these two countries. With this, I know I'm just in time, exactly at 4:30. So this is what we had. I know it was quite a fast forward session. We would be happy to take any questions if anyone has at this stage, or maybe at a later stage we can connect. Our contact details are there on the screen. And if you have any questions, I think I can take a pause and we'll be glad to take any questions from now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhupendra. It was pretty on time. If you have anything to discuss on this session, you can go ahead a little longer.
Okay, all right. So I just have one point, primarily in terms of the customs Carota regulation. So I'll just go back to that slide, just 1 second. Okay, so while all the discussion points around RCEP and Indo-Japan treaty was more from the economic, and I would also say somewhere politically driven, because at the end of the day, what kind of customs tariff rate or duty structure is to be adopted, it depends absolutely on the governments. Now, the example which I was giving towards the end of the presentation, to request for some digital services to be included in the free time in the free trade agreement, in that case, it's not the case that companies will put up a proposition today and government will agree in next week or maybe 10 days. It's a long drawn process. First, the representation will go to the government, and thereafter both the government representatives will discuss, and then they will come to a conclusion, right? But in the meantime, business will not and cannot stop. And hence, in those cases, it's really, really important and critical for all the importers in India as well as exporters from Japan to be very careful and mindful about the ever-evolving customs rules on the availment of free trade agreements, which are Carota 2020. Now, I'll just give you a few examples from our personal experience, what we have handled in various ports of import in India. And hopefully you'll get some idea exactly, how the customs authorities are looking at the documentation requirement. So in one of the cases, what had happened is that, the customs broker in India, what we also call as a customs house agent, he had filed an advance bill of entry claiming free trade agreement for goods being imported from Thailand. Now, along with that advance bill of entry, all the documents and information was submitted to the customs authorities. Having given all the data and documents, the customs authorities had just one doubt, because the stamp, the certificate, the stamp on the certificate, country of origin certificate, that was slightly blurred. Customs authorities felt that, okay, it's not a genuine certificate, and they put that entire import consignment under scrutiny. Now, of course, at the end of the day, everything sailed through clearly, but to complete that process, it took almost 2 to 3 weeks, because the importer had to go back to the exporter to get a clearly visible country of origin with a proper stamp of customs authorities of exporting country. Then the importer had to resubmit, and customs authorities had to take a final decision. During these 2 to 3 weeks, the demurrage and the detention charges were so high that it was like that, why have we even brought the goods into India till the time we actually reviewed the documents. So in our view, it becomes really important, just have a thorough look at the documents. At the same time, you cannot, or your team cannot keep doing this on consignment to consignment basis. So what we have done is that we have set up a standard operating procedures, what we call as SOP, for all imports from free trade agreements. The whole objective is to lay down step by step what activities are required, what documents are to be seen, and what specific points in a document has to be seen. Once we have all those details, the supply chain management team, or the team responsible for the export and imports of goods into India and out from India, they know exactly what they have to see. And if there's any red flag, they can highlight that red flag before time. And I say before time, before the goods arrive into India. So that SOP is what is being implemented at various companies. And trust me when I say it, it has really helped, at least in shrinking the time for clearance of goods. Because what matters is that at the end of the day, importers should not pay customs duties because it's covered under free trade agreement. And also there should not be unnecessary demurrage or detention charges, because it's a direct impact on P&L. The landed cost of goods, if you add up detention and demurrage, it can just put the entire profit workings at a stake, right? So with these two specific examples, a professional suggestion is that just be extremely mindful about the Carota regulations, and not just the current regulations. Government has in last almost a year's time have given many clarifications that what data has to be submitted and how it has to be reviewed. So please keep your eyes and ears open, because as I mentioned, the business will continue. And the only way is that we are compliant with all the documentation and rules and regulations requirement while we are trading in goods from any country, definitely including Japan. So that was one point. And another point which I just wanted to highlight on this SEPA and RCEP. The example rather I wanted to give is that let's look at a situation again, companies from the Indian side may relate it more. Last year, government of India just took a call that, okay, we really want to ban TikTok for various reasons, primarily security reasons, correct? In a situation, if India would have been part of RCEP, that kind of decision could not have been possible because RCEP clearly mandates that there cannot be any upright and upfront restriction on trade in services. With those kind of restrictions being placed in RCEP countries, again, had India been also part of RCEP, then any kind of security threatening services, primarily digital services, which are coming from any country could have been difficult to handle. And that's where even in the other free trade agreements where government of India is negotiating with various other countries, including United Kingdom, one of the major discussion points is that on digital services, India still wants to keep its stance, which is that as a country, as government of India, we want to control the data which belongs to the Indian citizens. That's the long and short of everything. So RCEP, as I was mentioning, someone might see and might say that, okay, it's really beneficial. But when we look at these two factors, one is the security criteria for digital services. And secondly, that within RCEP, you have different tariff, different customs duty rate. It really kind of, brings down the overall benefit of RCEP significantly. And what India has been doing is that to take care of the outcome where India is not part of RCEP, the bilateral free trade agreements are being implemented so as to make sure that whatever benefit on account of trade in goods could have been possible in RCEP is also possible otherwise. So all in all, the nutshell is that RCEP and CEPA 2011, which is Indo-Japan Free Trade Agreement of 2011, they can be said to be at the same platform, definitely yes, but from a security parameter, I think CEPA 2011 is still better because it gives both the countries, not just Indian government, both the countries free hand to deal with the digital services and the security concerns. And hence, I generally tend to say that, let's not look at RCEP in a silo that, hey, there's so many benefits. The customs duty rate is so low. But when you literally sit down and compare country by country customs duty rate, you might come to a conclusion that the benefit is not so high as it is being kind of, showcased. So nothing to be kind of, thinking or being worried about that now RCEP is coming. Will the trade have any impact between India and Japan? My personal and professional view is no impact whatsoever. The trade between these two countries will continue. And I'm sure with the inclusion of food exports in India and Japan treaty, it's bound to grow. So, well, these were few kind of, real life examples of thoughts, which I felt that, I can share with you all. Shefali, back to you for any closing remarks, or if there are any questions, happy to take those.
Thank you, Mr. Bhupendra, for such an informative session. It must be very helpful for manufacturing companies, and almost every manufacturing company right now is into import and export. It will be a beneficial session for them.
Yes, and I hope that, everyone got some snippets or some thoughts and ideas from this presentation. And once again, thank you, everyone, and to Shefali, you and the team for organizing this wonderful session.
Thank you for joining us, Konnichiwa Pune 2021. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Shefali. See you soon.